What's up, everybody? It's Corey, host of the Grease Pole Podcast, and I wanted to welcome you in today to kind of our first video. We've said we were going to cover the hell out of Super Bowl 57. We're going to start flooding your timeline with coverage for the big game, and this is first/second video in wherever the Super Bowl 57 series takes us, which is going to be a lot of places. So thanks for taking the ride with us. Really appreciate you clicking. Here's the thing. All right, as it pertains to Super Bowl Sunday, right? You've got, at this point as we're recording this video, a little less than 2 weeks of coverage, right? You've got the Pro Bowl games, whatever the hell that is now, in between Championship Sunday and the Super Bowl itself. So there's a lot of filler in there, right? There's a lot of minutia, a lot of bullshit. You've got media night, Tuesday, the Super Bowl week always, but until then, it's kind of a lot of the same stuff. So, you know, media is going to be grasping at storylines and breaking down film, which we're going to do as well. But in the meantime, you know, you kind of always hear the same storylines that pertains to the Super Bowl, even early on, right? First thing, Andy Reid versus the Eagles. The Kelce Brothers, right? Also, the fact that it's the only Super Bowl ever that features two black starting quarterbacks, which is awesome. But those are the main three things that you've heard so far. So what I wanted to do today was kind of take a look at some of the lesser storylines, right? The mid-card, if you will, and kind of take a look at some other stuff that makes this matchup a little juicy and a little intriguing for more reasons than those. So before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Again, if you're an Eagles fan, welcome. Shit tons of Super Bowl content that's going to be coming your way, so hit the subscribe button. And even if you're not an Eagles fan, love to have you hit the subscribe button as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at 5 storylines that aren't getting as much play, at least yet, as the main ones are, the marquee angles, if you will. So a lot of people, again, forget Andy Reid versus the Eagles. What about Nick Sirianni versus the Chiefs and the fact that Andy Reid fired Nick Sirianni, right? Because, you know, immediately following Kansas City's wonky-ass win over Cincinnati in the AFC Championship, you know, one of the first storylines to come to mind for the public was that this matchup features Andy Reid up against the franchise that he himself resurrected. That or the Kelce Brothers, you know, and those are the dominating ones, as we said. So Andy's not the only coach in this game facing his former team. Our guy, Nick Sirianni, broke into the NFL with the Chiefs as the wide receiver coach under Todd Haley. When Kansas City hired Andy Reid, it was Reid that showed Sirianni the door in favor of longtime Eagles assistant David Culley. And ever since, Andy's filled his staff with a handful of names that Eagles fans know and are familiar with. Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy played running back for the Eagles in 1999, Reid's first year as head coach in Philly. Defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo was Eagles linebacker and secondary coach under Andy from 99 to 2006. Kansas City running back coach Greg Lewis played wide receiver for the Eagles during Andy's tenure. Tom Melvin, current tight end coach with the Chiefs, has served as the same position under Andy Reid ever since he was hired by Jeff Lurie back in 1999. Chief special teams coach Dave Tube spent 3 years as an assistant special teams coach under John Harbaugh, who was special teams coordinator at the time in Philly under Andy Reid before Baltimore hired him to be their head coach. And you've also got linebacker coach Ken Flagel, who was the Eagles linebacker coach under Doug Peterson from 2016 to 2020. And Chris Long even has his face tattooed on his ribcage. Ken Flagel, that is. So pretty awesome shit. And this matchup is littered with coaching staff, wrestling angles, all the way from the head coaches to the assistants. So I thought it was pretty cool to see how the many connections there are across the sidelines in this game. Number 4, Carson Wentz backups. And this really, I'm sure this probably clicked to a lot of people. I just wanted to take a moment and laugh at the expense of Carson Wentz, especially after being known as a Wentz guy, quote unquote, when I started this podcast back in 2020. And isn't it ironic that after having Doug Peterson run out of town, you had the hiring of Nick Sirianni in an attempt to appease Carson and his entitlement, that it's Peterson and Sirianni that continue to thrive while Wentz isn't even starting for his second team in as many years. So Not only that, but the two quarterbacks who got the Eagles to these Super Bowls were once his backups, right? So you've got, obviously, now Foles is forever a legend amongst the Eagles fan base, and Hurts is already beloved by teammates and fans alike. So in the meantime, Washington might end up drafting a quarterback in the first round this year. So it's funny how shit works out sometimes is all. Number 3, Jalen Hurts. The mentality. What about him specifically? Unless you're a Cowboys fan, there honestly may not be a more likable human being at quarterback in the NFL than Jalen Hurts. You know, you all know, we all do. He was replaced by Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama, kind of forgotten about before he ended up transferring over to Oklahoma, where he worked his ass off and continued to thrive before being drafted in the second round immediately after the Eagles paid Carson Wentz. So he sat behind Carson, kind of becoming an afterthought until Wentz's struggles and his mental weakness began to show. And all Hurts did was grind and grind and grind until he got his opportunity. And then ever since he got it, all he's done is improve. This dude has worked and worked and worked his fucking ass off to get to this point. And you can tell from his demeanor and everything he says, he doesn't get too high or too low. Even after the NFC Championship win over San Francisco, he kept saying, you know, there's still one more. We've got one more game left to win. It's admirable, and you can tell that his teammates fucking love him, right? He's the biggest star in Delco right now, and you never hear anything about him being out running around or having any types of issues, all the way down to speeding tickets. He's a class act on and off the field, and it seems like all he really does is charitable work and study film, you know? Hell, nobody even knew his ass had a girlfriend until this past Sunday, the NFC Championship game, right? And, you know, reportedly, if you look into it, they met at Alabama, have kind of been seeing each other on and off ever since, and she's been with him every chapter of the journey. So she's not a celebrity or someone seeking that lifestyle or an Instagram model or whatever the fuck, and that feels perfect for a guy like Hurts that doesn't really give a shit about any of the extracurricular stuff that comes with the type of season he's had. He just wants to keep winning football games. And now you juxtapose that to a guy like Patrick Mahomes, where Mahomes was likable when Kansas City first drafted him. You know, he kind of came out, is he going to fit? Air raid system, they moved up to get him. He was kind of in obscurity for a little bit, sitting behind Alex Smith. You know, so at first he was very likable. You could root for him. And it seems like now the success is definitely kind of starting to get to his head. And I guess that would be the case, you know, with a lot of people. But with Mahomes, it's not only him anymore. It's like it's a package deal, including his inner circle. Mainly his wife, who, yes, they've been together since high school, and his brother, who just seemed to gleefully bask in the spotlight of the success and the celebrity that the quarterback of the Chiefs has earned for himself. All the social media shit, dancing on TikTok on the sidelines. And at this point, I think everybody that's not a Chiefs fan, at least everybody I've talked to, finds that shit to be obnoxious and finds Mahomes to be fairly fucking obnoxious as well at this point. After the money, part ownership of the Kansas City Royals and all this shit, State Farm, he's everywhere. You know, and now with Tom Brady retiring, the torch has been passed and Mahomes is officially kind of like the poster child of the NFL. So I just found the dichotomy of the two quarterbacks to be interesting. You know, on one side, you've got this super humble guy that keeps his private life private. And on the other, you've got an arrogant dude whose family kind of fucking leeches off his fame. At least, you know, perception is what it seems like. And look, I'm not trying to sell Jalen Hurts as Jesus Christ here. I'm honestly not. But as an Eagles fan, I'll just say that I'm glad that we've got the guy that isn't a douche, is humble, and doesn't ever really seem to take anything for granted. And he's about to get paid, and I hope he stays true to himself. So never change, QB1. How about Chris Long versus Kyle Long? All right, everybody knows that Super Bowl 57 is a classic of the Kelce Brothers, even though they're never actually on the field at the same time. It's much like, you know, Baltimore and San Francisco in Super Bowl 47 when John and Jim Harbaugh's team squared off. One of the angles at play here in Super Bowl 57 is that it's the first time two brothers are playing against each other in the big game. But what if we had two sets of brothers in the same game? Chris Long, fellow Virginia-based podcaster, finished his career as an Eagle, retiring after the 2018 season. But you've got to think that with Howie Roseman's affinity for depth in the trenches and his willingness to retain key veterans like Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox, it's reasonable to think that had he not retired, Chris Long would still be an Eagle, and he was productive here as well. You know, he said on several occasions how much he loved his time in Philly. He's even gone back to the city for, the Phillies in the World Series. He was at the Link on Sunday for the NFC Championship. The Eagles are a topic of discussion constantly, often on Chris's Green Light podcast, where former Eagle Bo Allen is a regular guest. And he's constantly got former Eagles appearing on the Green Light pod. And also a regular there is Chris's brother Kyle, who was a first rounder in the NFL as well. Kyle never won a Super Bowl or even a playoff game, being on the field at least. He was a member of the Chicago Bears for that double doink game and would subsequently retire before coming out of retirement to sign with Kansas City in the 2021 offseason. And he would go on to officially retire after the Chiefs lost to the Bengals in the 2022 AFC Championship this past year. But Chris and Kyle both said that this year's Championship Sunday had them wishing they were still out there. And how awesome would that be if Howie Long's Seamen were still in the NFL and this game became a tag team match? Brothers versus brothers. You got Jason and Chris against Travis and Kyle. It'll be fun to hear the Long brothers take on the game in the coming days, given their most recent affiliations when they were in the league, the last teams they played with here in Super Bowl 57. Number one storyline for me, I haven't heard anybody else mention this yet. Could one of these teams be the next dynasty? All right, and before you call me a homer, just take a walk with me here. All right, every decade's got a team that stood out above everybody else, a team that kind of dominates the decade from a championship perspective, right? The 70s, you had the Steel Curtain Steelers. The 80s, you had Joe Montana and the 49ers. The 1990s were the Antichrist, and the 2000s and 2010s, both decades belonged to Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and the New England Patriots. And that's not going to carry over to this decade, obviously. So who's the team of the 2020s going to be? Both teams have won a Super Bowl in the last 5 years, but the Birds won Super Bowl 52 in 2018. So for the purpose of this topic and this conversation, that one we'll just put out the window or set to the side for now. The Chiefs defeated San Francisco in Super Bowl 54 in 2020 to kick off the decade we're currently in, and they went back the following year where they ultimately lost to Tampa in the COVID Bowl. So already 3 appearances, 1 win, and 1 result pending, obviously, Super Bowl 57, for Kansas City, who show no signs of going away anytime soon, right? You've still got Andy Reid. You've got Patrick Mahomes locked up long-term. And while Tyreek Hill's now in Miami, Travis Kelce is the greatest tight end of all time, and he's still there. On the flip side, the Eagles are becoming one of the most consistent organizations in the NFL. Howie Roseman's going to sign Jalen Hurts to a long-term contract in the coming offseason, and several other key players are already under contract for a few more years as well. And given the turnover that's happened on this roster since Super Bowl 52, it's safe to say that Howie Roseman's among the best in the league at working the cap and managing to retool a roster with a quick turnaround if necessary. And you look around the landscape in the NFC, it's definitely the weaker of the two conferences, and barring another Carson Wentz-esque implosion, which you wouldn't think would happen behind the scenes with a guy like Jalen Hurts, given everything we just said, the Birds look to be in the conversation for the next 3 to 5 years. And every dynasty has those moments you look back at and go, that's it. That's the moment where it all started. And for these two teams, this game could end up serving as that moment. So what storyline grabbed your attention? Did we miss any? If so, drop it in the comment section below and we'll touch on it here or on Monday's episode of the pod leading up to Super Bowl 57. Also, we're going to be flooding YouTube with tons of Super Bowl related content leading up to the game next Sunday on the 12th. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to make sure that you don't miss anything. And as always, the mothership, the Grease Pole Podcast, comes your way each and every Monday where you can listen on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever it is that you get your podcast. Not to mention, again, here on our YouTube channel where every episode is simulcast. Tell a friend that's an Eagles fan, won't you? There's plenty more Super Bowl content to come over the next week and a half. We'll see you next time. As always, go Birds.